Hey there! Today we're going to talk about an ink that is stored in my hat. It's a little known fact, but my hat has a little pouch. You see that? That will keep an ink vial. I'm not cheating. The ink vial is stored securely in my hat. I can just remove for said ink vial. And here we go, the ink vial. This ink was sent to me. It's this ink. It was sent to me by Phil and Matthew. And that's a father and son combination that I correspond with in Ireland. And they said, Stephen, you need this ink. And so they send it to me, and now it's going to be an Inkcyclopedia entry. What is interesting about this ink? Interesting about this ink is that it is Rohrer und Klingner. That is interesting because it's a brand I've been looking to try out for quite a while, but for some reason I never got to it. And it has not been covered in the Inkcyclopedia before. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. So that's nice. The second thing that's nice is that this is Salix, and Salix by this brand is an iron gall ink. Recently someone asked me whether I could cover iron gall inks in Inkcyclopedia. I have already covered one, Mont Blanc Midnight Blue, but this is another one. So we're going to do this today. I found this to be an interesting blue. It is very well behaved. Very well behaved. It seems to work well. It has some interesting properties. You'll see that in the writing part. And that's all there's to it. So, Matthew, Phil, thanks a lot for sending me this ink, because now this is going to go into the Inkcyclopedia, and it's hopefully going to be useful for many people. So, enough talk. I think we should do some writing. That's what we're going to do next. I hope this is going to be useful, and let me just store that ink back in my hat before I forget, and I'll see you later. Bye bye. Alright, so today we're going to have a look at Rohrer und Klingner Salix. I'm just going to say Salix, and I think we should start with some fine writing. Okay, now, oh, here's my cap. We move to medium. Okay, so far I'm enjoying this ink. It flows well. No hard starts. No skips. Looks good. Also, I notice that when the ink is wet, it seems to be a relatively light blue, and it dries to something that, this is, well, I won't say Penman Sapphire, but it is an intense blue, and then it dries to something that is a bit grayer. That is something I have noticed a bit with Mont Blanc Midnight Blue too. Also an iron gall ink. Boom. That was broad. And then finally we have an Italic Nib. Right. Then I think it is time to do some passes. Let's start with the first pass. Yes, it would be fairly odd to start with a third pass, of course. A nice blue, looks fairly light, but I think we're going to see that as it dries up, we're getting a darker, more grayish, Brian grayish, no wait, not well, blue. So that's fascinating. While we are at it, we may as well make some calligraphy. A big letter. No, wait, I forgot the flex. Oh no. Let's just add the flex. Flex. I am pushing this ink quite a bit by using a lot of flex here, and I don't know about you, but I don't see any railroading. Let's go a bit faster, see if I can make it railroad. Yes, okay, but that is writing fairly quickly. I would not do that if I would want real flex writing. So that's pretty impressive. Now of course it has some startup issues because the feed is a bit dry, but if I go a bit slower again, boom! Looks good to me! And as you can see, this ink is indeed getting a bit darker and is getting a bit grayer. Alright, now let's do that calligraphy. So we got a bit of fat writing we can expose to the eyedropper of death. Alright, so how about an S? For some reason, I don't know why, I like the letter S. S for Salix, and incidentally for Asbury Brown. Okay, second pass. Ooh, yeah, looks good to me. Now, I want a bit of regular writing. This was not a skip. That was something I did. I mislined the nib. Alright. And I think that we should start doing some tests here. So, first of all, there is that moment you've all been waiting for, the Tardif test. Then, I think we wait for just a second. And we have a look at the third pass for the highly saturated pens. Now I think that we should have a look at that very sad moment where our ink disappears, and for that we use the bastard brush. you can see, I'm really torturing that last bit of writing. But this being an iron gall ink, this is what I expected. The water has no effect. Sure, you see a bit of a halo of this color, but the writing remains there. And that's because it's an iron gall ink. So it should be water resistant. I think it actually is. Isn't that cool? Okay, then we have, this is still drying a bit. What can we deduce from the Tardif test? Well, I think that is that nice, deep, odd, blue, grayish color I associate with iron gall inks. It's a typical color. It's a color sometimes you have to get used to a little bit. But let me just take a sip of tea here. Thank you, much better. You have to get used to it a bit. It's not the very typical blue you may think of when you think of fountain pen ink. That sort of school ink or something. This is more like a blue-black, I would say. But once you get used to it, I think it's a beautiful color. Alright, let's cheat a little bit here. I want to get rid of this drop of ink. There we go. And then I think we should have a meeting with our good old friend, the Eyedropper of Death. And quite simply, yet again, I don't see any ill effects of the water on the ink. So I guess there's only one more thing we can actually attempt. The brown benchmark. Now that was a serious benchmark. Cool. Okay. I just did some damage control on my finger. I'm back now. Here we go with this ink. I think we need to figure out a scorecard for the ink. So what we have is cleaning. Well, being an iron gall ink, you may fear for the worst. According to Phil, the ink is not extremely difficult to clean, and I got the same impression from Sarge, who was on the show yesterday and who has this ink as well. For the Inkcyclopedia, I ink up, 6 pens. I had a lot of this ink on my fingers, and I took some of that what's the stuff called? The cleaning fluid, Regeron. That's the name of the stuff I have. I put some of that in my hand. I just wash my hands, and the ink is gone. So even though it is iron gall, it is not impossible to clean or anything. It's not like India ink, which is very hard to get off. So that's very nice. So although I haven't cleaned it from a pen yet, based on my hands, I'm not too fearful about all of this. So I'm going to say cleaning is okay to good. I guess it depends a little bit on how easy it is for you to open up a pen, really flush the feed well, etc. But it's not exactly the doesn't seem to be a worst case scenario. Bleed through. We'll have to look at that later. Color. Well, blue-black, I would say. Bit grayish. And we have shading. Well, let's have a look at shading. I haven't really paid a lot of attention to that yet. I think you see that very well in this flexi stuff. It goes from a lighter blue to a darker blue. This is the 3 nib, so a non-saturated nib and a highly saturated nib. It goes from a light blue-gray to a really blue-black dark gray. You see some nice shading in the broad nibs. Being a dark ink, it may not be the most pronounced, as in the most visible, the most in your face, but I definitely think there is shading, so I'm going to give it the shading good. And we have flow. Well, flow is good. I can say nothing bad about it. The pens were inked up, immediately wrote, no hard starts, nothing. Feathering. Have to check that later on some other paper. Drying time. Well, that doesn't seem to be excessive, so I'm going to say good. this brown benchmark right there. I don't know whether you can see that, but it's there. Waterproofness. Well, speaking of that, look at this. This is a whole bubble of water there. And the ink just remains exactly where it is. Doesn't move, doesn't budge, doesn't do anything. Just stays there. I'm going to get rid of that excess water. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I call a waterproof ink. Nothing has changed. Same thing there. So, waterproofness, very good. And now we should switch to some cheap copier paper. Where do I put my paper? I put my paper right there. Okay. Copier paper. Let's start with a fine nib. Here's a fine nib. Then we have a medium nib. And the paper, believe it or not, is still copier paper. Then we have a sip of tea. Sorry. Alright, then we have broad. And I think it's copier paper. Popa? Popa. Popa. Didn't we recently get a new Pope? Maybe this was Freud talking through me. Copier Popa. But if it's copier Popa, then we should have like two. Well, I don't know exactly where this is going. I think it's best if we move on. And we move on to an Italic Nib. Because this is an Italic Nib. And the paper, well, I'm not sure, but I think it's copier paper. Boom. How about some flexi writing? You ready for some flex appeal? I am. Sorry, Dan, I think I've stolen your F. How did that happen? Well, I don't think you've trademarked it, so I guess I can do that. Flex! I'm going to squeeze a little bit of ink into the feed for a nice wet line. There we go. Flexi wetness. Oh, right, and then I think we should have a bit of fat writing. Fat writing. I just love the fat writing every once in a while. This is just an O. It's the most boring letter. Well, not necessarily the boring. The most boring letter in the alphabet, I'm afraid, is an I. I mean, when you think about it, Oi. Oi, what are you doing? Not some crab salad. Oh, anyone say oi? I think you just said oi. I think... Can I maybe get interested in some crab... No, go away. Sorry about that. Oi. Right. So, what can we deduce from this writing? Well, I don't see any feathering in normal writing. Not even in the broad nib. In the drawing. This is an Italic Nib. I don't see any feathering there. I see very little feathering in the flexi writing, which I was pushing quite a bit. This is just a double line. I don't think that is actually feathering. I think that's more like a bit of ink. Now that's good. I don't see any feathering here. So I think this ink doesn't feather that much, which is very nice. What about bleed through? A well-behaved ink. This is flexi writing on copier paper, but all the other writing doesn't bleed through. Even this fat writing doesn't really bleed through. There's a bit of, it's not even shade through. I think that's just an impression made by pressure from the nib. It's a physical thing, but not really inky. What about the regular writing on the Rhodia paper? I don't see any feathering there. I see a bit of bleed through, but that's a brown benchmark. We can't really take that seriously. So I think we have us a good ink here. So what can I compare this to? Well, usually when I do these comparisons, let's first finish this up. Bleed through is good. And feathering is good. This ink scored very high marks. I may need to get myself a bottle of this. So usually when I do these comparisons, here we have, I'm not going to write down Rohrer and Klingner, R and K, Salix, Salix. You should probably, when it's German, you should probably say Salix. Salix, whatever. This is the color. Boom. Now usually when I do these comparisons, I try to find an ink that has the same color. But this being an iron gall ink, I thought that today I'd do a comparison with an ink that not so much necessarily has the same color, but has the same properties. And that ink would be Mont Blanc Midnight Blue, which is another commercially available iron gall ink for fountain pens. I have done a separate Inkcyclopedia entry on that ink, so if you are now all of a sudden completely interested, you can check that out at your very leisure. I have the feeling this ink is a bit more saturated and is even grayer and darker than this Salix, which is something you can see here. Now when the two of them dry up completely, I think this Midnight Blue 2 is a very dark, intense blue. Very dark. A true blue-black. The Salix is probably a little bit lighter. I think it also has a little bit better shading. But, you know, that's up for you to decide. Again, if you're interested, maybe you want to check out the full Inkcyclopedia entry on that ink and see whether that's something you may be interested in purchasing. Alright, so there we have it. Let us again thank Phil and Matthew for sending me this sample of ink. I enjoyed it. I've convinced myself that I may need to get this ink. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.